Now, if you would, please join me as we recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
James Smith has our invocation.
Let us pray together. Dear God, we give thanks for this day. We're grateful that we are in a warm place. And we pray for those who do not have warmth today. And we remember those who are of service to them. We're grateful for this food that we've been able to take into our bodies today. And we remember those who are without food. And we pray for those who are of service to them. Bless this club. Bless our speaker. Give us a good day. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Walter Hobbs, Health and Happiness.
Thank you, Ring. When Ring saw me, the very first thing this afternoon, she said, I want you to keep it short during Health and Happiness. And I've got you to know that, I don't know why you pick on me like that, but it seems like every time I have Health and Happiness, I got to keep it short. I'm taking it personal. We got a visiting Rotarian, former Lord High Mayor, Jenny Stoltz. Where are you, Jenny? Any other visiting Rotarians? All right, guests of Rotarians on my left.
This is Crystal Gillette. She's with Adams Outdoors. You'll be seeing her picture plastered all over 10 locations in Gastonia.
Right, Crystal. Anyone else? Rick?
Got my friend and colleague, Ennis Abadrabo. Sometimes he says abracadabra works. Ennis originally from Damascus, Syria. Spent 25 years in New York, New Jersey area. About a year ago, finally realized there was a warmer place to live and moved down here. So I'm glad to have you.
Welcome to the balmy South. Jane?
My guest again is Rusty Sayer. I think this club has been introduced to Rusty a few times. He's one of our biggest volunteers at the Rotary Garden. I think I've introduced him before as Wheelchair Rusty, because Rusty rolls up and down Union Road in his wheelchair to make it to the garden. But he has, since our last visit, had 2 or 3 surgeries, and he is now walking.
As a new member, I needed to bring a guest, so I thought I'd do one better and brought the food. Denise McLean is the principal of Highland. I'll forget the rest of the official now. Highland, you know where Highland is. And Marty Starnes, who is semi-retired but can't quit working.
I have with me today my daughter Keglin, who's getting to spend a snow day with me.
Lucky Keglin. And speaking of billboards, a friend of mine sent me one. This is for it's a big, huge billboard. Maybe Adams did it. And it's for an attorney. True story. And it's got a picture of this attorney. And the slogan up there is, just because you did it doesn't mean you're guilty. And little health issues. It's good to see Mo back. Welcome back. Good to see you looking so good. Sindor Thompson's having surgery. Wing match this weekend, I think. Saturday. He's got a mass in his colon that they're going to have to go in there and deal with one way or the other. So keep him in your prayers. Harry Britt is still on the road to recovery. And he still appreciates phone calls and cards, and we'll see him come through that door probably in the next few weeks when the weather warms up. One of the reasons we're trying to get out of here kind of quickly is Denise Fry's funeral or memorial service at 2 o'clock at the Presbyterian Church. So I know many of you are going to go straight from here to there. A couple other things. I do have some pictures here in the paper. I was noticing the series of pictures here about United Way and noticed the big head. And I looked closer and it looked like Steve Long. Steve, congratulations. It looks like that you guys won the Harold Sumner Award for service to the Gastonia County United Way.
Thank you, exactly. The Sumner brothers for honoring my father with the Harold Sumner Award a few weeks ago.
Great. That was your dad's deal. And Debbie Alley, I saw you slip in. I saw you were in there. And did you bring $1?
I did.
Drag it back, get you another one. You send her credit, Cheryl. You were mentioned on the very next page with Gaston Together, perhaps?
Yes.
So you're a busy lady. Thank you. Congratulations. Rick Craig here? No? Okay, any happy dollars?
Nobody's happy that you're here.
I'm happy. I just want to share with you, we are getting ready to start our spring and summer garden. And we are having our training today for our garden volunteers. And we will have that in room 101 and 102.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, thanks.
Okay, Cheryl Rhodes, quick announcement.
There is nothing I like better than collecting checks and money. And we have a jar back here, and I'm challenging all of you to contribute money today. I'm putting in $100, and there's other people that are joining me in this little endeavor to end polio now. We are 3 countries away from taking care of this. The Gates Foundation is matching money 2 to 1. People, come on, look deep, and put it on in.
Thank you, Cheryl. Our check's already in the jar, so write them out, and if you have not got your checkbook with you this week, Charlie.
Past Presidents Collis, Long, and Pinniger would like to seek that challenge with this $100.
Fabulous. Thank you, guys. And with a 2-to-1 match from the Gates Foundation, we have got our money that we're collecting today, the money that we matched Greer Schools contributions, plus the contributions from the Early Act Service Club at Greer, so we will be able to make a sizable contribution for ending polio. Thank you for your participation. Real quickly, since Sidnor is going to be out for several weeks recovering from his surgery, the Shepherd's men are going to be making their run through Gastonia again. He is not going to be able to coordinate that, so if anyone would like to help facilitate that, please email me. I will be leaving right after the meeting to go to Mrs. Fry's service, but please email me if you would be willing to step up and help facilitate that run. And with no further ado, one more thing before I turn the program over. We have received today an anonymous $1,000 donation to our garden project by someone in the community who has been very taken with it and wants to be a part of it. So $1,000 for the garden today to kick off our spring season. At this point, I will turn the program over to Candy to introduce our speaker.
I am so happy to introduce David because he's been a special part of the Thomas family for many, many years and deserves a star in his crown for that. So, he is a native Gastonian, having attended local schools and graduated with a BS in biology from Mars Hill University. He worked as a production manager for Gerber Baby Foods in Asheville, North Carolina, before coming back home to Gastonia to become the first program curator at Schill Museum of Natural History and Planetary. He was the 3rd professional staff member hired at the museum and worked closely with the museum's founder, Mr. R.M. Schill. David formed Educatours in 1986, specializing in educational tours and field trips for schools in the Charlotte, Gastonia, and York County areas. In 1997, his daughter, Amy McHenry Smith, joined him as Director of Sales, and the two have worked to build a successful business providing first-rate tours and field trips. In August, David named Amy President of Educatours to spend more free time at their second home in Boone. David's a former member of the Morning Rotary Club and a Paul Harris Fellow. He is a Mason, past Master, and Shriner. He is past President of the Evening Kiwanis Club and is an active member of Citizens Investment Association. He's been married to my cousin Jenny Thomas Stoltz, a two-time Paul Harris Fellow for 48 years. David serves on the board of Keep Gastonia Beautiful, is a mentor at Pleasant Ridge Elementary, and past chair of the administrative board at First United Methodist Church. In November, David and Jenny honored Amy with a Paul Harris Fellow to support the Polio Plus program. The Stoltzes have two grandchildren, Mary McHenry, a graduate of Appalachian State University, and Matt McHenry, a junior at UNC Charlotte. Now let's give David a warm welcome.
Thank you. Picture's worth 1,000 words. This is a program that one of your fellow Rotarians, John P., is responsible for filming this program, recording it, editing the program. I'd like to show you this. We're having some difficulty, so hopefully it will work. I'm not a technical person, but hopefully this will work. When the program is over, and I think it's self-explanatory, then I'll stand up and talk for a few minutes. I know this is a sad day for many of you, especially those of you that are Presbyterians. If you have to leave during my program, I will not be offended. So hopefully this will work. Then I'll talk a while, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you have after the program.
As modern-day Rotarians living in North Carolina, when we speak of polio, we tend to think of Pakistan, Afghanistan, or some other land far from home. But there was a time, not all that long ago, that just the word polio struck fear in the heart of every mother in Gaston County. And our community stood at the heart of the Tar Heel State's efforts to aid those afflicted with the disease. For it was here that state officials agreed to build the North Carolina Orthopedic Hospital, high on a hill along New Hope Road, from where you could see downtown Charlotte. Opened in 1921, the hospital closed its doors in 1979. The polio threat in the U.S. had been eliminated. But the lives of 4 Gastonia residents intersected with polio and the North Carolina Orthopedic Hospital. Dr. George Miller came to the hospital in 1950 as a surgeon. The woman he would later marry, Judy, was a physical therapist specializing in polio patients who worked at a hospital in Greensboro, where she would treat a young polio victim by the name of David Stoltz, who would later marry a girl who worked for Dr. Miller at the orthopedic hospital here, Jenny. To learn more about polio in the mid-20th century and the state hospital on the hill in Gastonia, the 4 longtime friends sat down together for a chat.
Well, the orthopedic hospital is a very interesting institution, and this started from a dream of a gentleman here in Gastonia who first thought about orphan children, and he was anxious to do something to benefit them. And as he began discussing this, some of the local ladies and some of the people in the community realized that we needed some type of institution to take care of people, and they decided that it was not an orphanage that we needed, but we needed a hospital for crippled children. And this was started with efforts in the state legislature, and over a period of several years they finally managed to get the state legislature to give money to establish an orthopedic hospital, and they looked around and obtained Dr. Oscar Miller, who at that time was practicing in Atlanta with the Shrine Hospital down there, and they asked him to come here to develop the North Carolina Orthopedic Hospital. The hospital was founded on a very low budget, and we were very fortunate to have a lot of support here, and which kept pressure on the legislature to get this institution started.
I was in my second week of the first grade at Victory School and had felt terrible for several weeks, and Dr. Prince checked me and said, "This young man has polio." So he called an ambulance. It was a Friday afternoon, and off we go in the back of the ambulance to the Children's Hospital in Greensboro. And I stayed there for a total of 4 months, actually 5 months.
Well, I came to the polio hospital actually in November of 1952, and David came in September of 1953. And I was brought on board because I was looking for a place to work concentrating in polio. That was my particular interest after having taken some extra training at Warm Springs, Georgia. So I was brought on board because of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, which was a fundraising organization to raise money for people who not only had polio, but who were going to work in polio. And through them I found that this opening was at the Greensboro Polio Hospital. When I came, the hospital, I would say, was quite full because this was a pretty peak time when the one of the big epidemics was going on. And they were anywhere from infants, tiny little children, to adults. We had quite a few adults, which is quite a heartbreaker to see married women, mothers, fathers, and so forth, who also have polio. As far as the severity of the cases, we'd have everything from something that was relatively mild to people who were in iron lungs.
The iron lung was needed when people couldn't breathe. They had paralysis of their lungs, and obviously without breathing you're not going to survive. So you had to have some method to allow them to breathe. And in the beginning this was a big metal chamber, and it was hooked up to suction apparatus so that it could cause the chest to expand and then relax with alternating pressures so that the body would force the air in and take it in and then force it out. And this required electricity 24 hours a day. We had one episode here where we lost power, and we had to have people come in and pump the air into the chamber. So, and you can imagine what a complication that was till we got power back, because we had to have all these people by each bed pumping to keep that person alive. Iron lung was a noisy darn machine, but it saved a lot of lives, and most people managed to get off it. Not either recovered or you died.
I addition to iron lungs, we have the rocking bed, which when a person is being weaned away from an iron lung, they're put on the rocking bed, and the rocking bed would do just exactly what it said. It would rock like this, which would encourage their breathing muscles to work.
On physical therapy day, I was given a tricycle, and I got to ride down the halls to this young lady, and she would do her therapy, and she had a water tank, and I think you'll see pictures of that later. But that was the highlight of today, to see Miss Miller and to be able to ride a tricycle and get out of bed.
The children are absolutely remarkable. We didn't have problems most of the time with any discipline. We didn't have any lack of cooperation from parents or from the children. And one of the funny things that happened one day in the clinic, we're down there, the clinic was downstairs at the lower level, and there was a big hill just outside, and I happened to look up and I saw this two boys, and these boys were in hip spica casts, and that means they had casts from both legs up onto their body, and they had managed to get themselves out of the ward upstairs, sneaking away from the nurses. They were out there sliding down the hill in their hip spica casts, and it just amazed me that they managed to make it that far.
There was an environment there with the staff that was very joyful. You would think it would be a sad place, but it was a very joyful place. I mean, even from medical records where you're hooked up to a dictaphone, typing clinical notes and trying to understand, medical terminology that is said, but there was just a feeling of joy throughout that hospital.
They seemed like family to me.
They did
always.
seem like
the
family.
Workers there, you take Nancy Hunter and Nellie, and the physical therapist. It was a very united group of people.
And I remember one little girl that was just kind of left there. Her name was Bonnie. And
she was left where?
At orthopedic.
Oh.
And she was just left there. And so people would gravitate to Bonnie.
There was a tremendous amount of alarm about it, and people did not let their children go out to play. There were not public gatherings, and all that type of activity for children just about completely disappeared during the acute times of year, and that was usually in the fall.
The number of the new victims is rising daily, almost hourly in some towns. And it seems so cruel, so ironically tragic that they should be struck down when we may be on the verge of preventing polio forever. It increases our obligation, our moral responsibility to them.
We treated here at the North Carolina Orthopedic Hospital the patients who had bulbar polio, and those were the patients who were paralyzed and they were in iron lungs. And we had one whole ward here which had about 50 beds in it, and special duty nurses who treated these patients in the acute phase.
I couldn't go to school. They told me I couldn't go back to the first grade, but I had a wonderful teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, that taught at Victory School, that would come to the house every day and keep me up with my lessons, as she called them. And I passed first grade, went on to the second grade.
Many of the children had to be admitted over a long period of time. We had a school which actually graduated students. We had specialized teachers. We had wonderful support from the community. There was a Boy Scout troop here for the children. The ladies of the community volunteered, and they formed an organization called the Tiny Tim Society. These ladies served as registrars for the outpatient clinic. A lot of them did laundry for the children, and the Shrine Hospital, the Shriners group took over, and they had parties out here. They used to every year take all the children by, if necessary, ambulance over to Ivy's department store, and Mr. Ivy would see that each child had gifts at Christmas time, and the kids loved it because they came back escorted by the highway patrol with the ambulances and their sirens and all, and the kids just thought that was marvelous.
The polio vaccine came out about 1955, the initial one, and because of it, it really sort of closed up the polio hospital up in Greensboro, so we no longer had a quantity of patients, and the patients were pretty much referred to other clinics. Is unfortunately the elimination of polio internationally has not been accomplished.
Right.
And there are certain areas of the world where they just haven't had the vaccine, or they have forbidden the vaccine. And I think that's what you Rotarians are wanting to do, is to make sure that these countries will in fact let people come in and do the vaccinations as they should.
We are this close.
We are this close.
Tuturek Modes.
This close to making history.
Ofon Wantinti.
We are this close.
We are this close.
We're this close.
This close to changing the world. We are this close to making sure no child suffers a crippling disease
ever again.
We are this close to making history.
We are this close to ending polio.
Because we are this close to ending polio.
We are this close to ending polio.
We are this close
to changing the world.
This close.
All we need is you.
Is you.
It's you.
Is you.
We are this close. This close.
Be a part of history at rotary.org/endpolio.
I'm sorry for the quality of the program today, but it was a one-time thing. The Roberts are not physically able to take part in this, so we had one chance to record it, and we did get a recording. And I'm very thankful for what they did and for what John P. did in his work. As you saw from the film, I was in my second week of the first grade. I was an excited, happy, skinny, things change. Skinny little first grader at Victory School, which is now down in Lingerfeld School, it's down in South Gastonia. I was becoming sick in my second week. I felt terrible. I was taken to the doctor. I had a fever, all the signs of strep throat. I was taken to the doctor, and the doctor confirmed it is strep throat, sent me home. And the next day, when I woke up, I could not move. I was having very severe problems breathing. My neck would not move. I was in terrible pain. And my mother said, well, I'm going to try another doctor, Dr. George Prince, who was a new pediatrician in Gastonia. George Prince, when I went to him, he examined me and he said, he told my mother, which is kind of disconcerting to a mother, he said, if this boy doesn't get treatment, he's going to die. So he says, you call your husband, I'm going to call an ambulance, and we're going to the hospital in Greensboro, North Carolina, which was set up specifically for children and adults with polio. So off we go. My dad is in the back of the ambulance with Dr. Prince. We go through, there was no Interstate 85, so we had to go right through the middle of Charlotte on a Friday afternoon. My dad said he looked up to the front of the ambulance several times and we were going 80, which is pretty fast back then. When we arrived at the hospital, Dr. Prince got out of the ambulance and my dad said his arms were bruised and he was bleeding because of the air tanks bumping up against him, keeping them off of me. So I stayed in the hospital there for 4 months, the Children's Hospital in Greensboro. I stayed until the first part, right before Christmas. Then I got to come home. I thought I was coming home for good, but I got to come home for several days. I think it was 3 days. Then I had to return to the hospital. And as Dr. Roberts mentioned, Dr. Miller mentioned, the hospital was divided into wards. I was, of course, in the young boys ward. There were probably 15 or 20 of us in the ward, and we were flat on our back. We were strapped in, not like a straitjacket, but we were strapped in so that we had to lie flat on our back. And we stayed like that for weeks at a time. And I do remember 4 children, 4 young boys, in the iron lungs. Iron lungs, as Dr. Miller said, they were very loud, very crude machines. They pumped air in and out all day, all night. They made a tremendous noise, but they did save lives. But one of the little fellows, it was a black boy. Back then, everything was segregated. Not at that hospital. It didn't matter what color you were. Didn't make any difference. Everybody was the same. But one of the black boys, I knew he was very ill. I could see the glass on the iron lung. I could see his face, and I knew he was very ill. One morning when I woke up, I looked over and he wasn't there. And I thought that was very strange, and I asked the nurse, I said, "Where did he go?" And she said, "Oh, he went home." And I started thinking, this little kid's a lot sicker than I am, and he gets to go home. It took me a long time to figure out what she was telling me. We had a number of kids that were in the iron lungs that went home during that time. Okay, I came back to Gastonia for 3 days, thought I was going to be home for the rest of the time. Had to go back to the hospital and stayed approximately a month. When I came home, as you heard in the film, Mrs. Abernathy, who taught at Victory School for 41 years, came to the house every afternoon, 5 days a week, with no pay, just out of the goodness of her heart, and did my lessons with me, as she called it. I passed first grade, which is pretty hard to believe since I didn't go for 5 months, but I passed first grade. The parents, when you were in the hospital, parents could visit twice a week. They could come for an hour on Wednesday. They could come for an hour on Sunday afternoon. My dad was there every Wednesday and every Sunday. My mother would come every Sunday. My dad at the time worked at Wicks Corporation. Mr. Alexander was the president of Wicks Corporation. He called my dad in when he found out that I had polio, and he said, "Bill, you take care of your family." He said, "If you need to be gone, you don't have to check with me, you don't have to check with the head of engineering, you just go and stay as long as you need to." So I'm always indebted to him for that. I told you about Miss Abernathy. I think she is a saint to spend that much time with the child when she had probably 25 or 30 other kids in the class. But she did that out of the goodness of her heart. When I came home from the hospital, I had to do exercises. oh, what a chore for me, but more especially for my mother. An hour and a half, starting in the 2nd grade. When I got home, we did an hour and a half of exercises each afternoon. Then when my dad got home later in the day, we did another hour and a half of exercises. So 3 hours a day that I'm exercising. Not to build me up, but to build up my chest because of my breathing, and to build up the muscles that had died or been paralyzed. But this went on for years. I was a patient at orthopedic hospital until I was 18 years old. Now that doesn't mean I was there all the time. I went to what they called the children's clinic, and Dr. Roberts or Dr. Miller would check me every 3 months, make sure of my progress, check with my parents. From the time I was in the 4th grade, I had to go to the orthopedic hospital every morning at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning and do exercises for an additional hour and a half. So had a lot of help along the way. When I was 18 years old, I was finally released as being a patient at orthopedic hospital. Jenny and I were dating then, and several years later, she worked at the orthopedic and medical records, and she had my records there in her hand from all that time, from the time I was 6 years old until I was 18. We're getting close to beating polio. As the film said, we're getting very close. The Gates Foundation is matching all the money that the Rotarians and Rotary International raise. Every dollar that the Rotarians raise, the Gates Foundation matches it with $2. We're getting close to beating polio. It's still in some backward countries, Pakistan, Syria, and Afghanistan. And the disease still exists there because of ignorance, the government, and political religious reasons. Let's just leave it that way. I think polio can be overcome. We're so much closer than we have been. In the 1980s, there were 350,000 cases of polio. And I doubt that you have seen many people that are crippled from polio. But I remember when I was a young person in my teens, there were a number of people in Gastonia that had arms and legs that were deformed. It's a terrible disease. Young people today don't know about it. You know, you mention polio and it's kind of like mentioning the Vietnam War. It's something they don't know about. I will be glad to answer questions. I know that some of you are pushed for time, and I can appreciate that, but if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. If you feel like you need to leave, that's fine. Any questions? Yes?
David, I've heard of a thing called post-polio syndrome, where people who had polio as children have symptoms or some kinds of problems as adults. Has that, I mean, and in fact, I know of 2 cases where that occurred. That, you know, even though the vaccination has been in existence and people have had polio, they get symptoms in the older years. Have you heard of that at all?
Yes, there was an organization here in Gaston County that I was a member of. Like I said, I've been very lucky. I've been very lucky. I don't know how I would feel if I had post-polio syndrome or if I didn't have it. You know, I have the aches and pains that everybody does. I do have weakness in my right arm and my left leg. I know those exist. I have some muscles that are paralyzed, but I'm still very fortunate. And I do expect that post-polio syndrome does exist because I've heard the personal stories of a lot of people that had that, and it is pretty serious. I had a knee replacement done 3 years ago, and Clay Thomason said, well, you'll probably be the last one I do. And I knew he wasn't talking about knee replacement. And I said, what? And he said, the last polio patient that I treated, which is probably true. You know, right after I came back to school, I think it was, I'm sure Dr. Fisher or some of the other doctors could give me an exact date, but I think it's 54 or 55, they had the shots for polio, and then they had the sugar tablets. And that virtually eliminated a lot of cases of polio that there would have been, but that took care of a lot of the cases. Yes, sir.
This club sponsored a scout troop at the Orthopedic Hospital.
I knew that. And Dr. Miller mentioned that this Rotary Club had sponsored a scout troop there. And I think that's a great thing. Give those kids something to do, especially scouting. My grandson's an Eagle Scout, so I can appreciate scouting. Thank you, Don Morin, for helping him with his Eagle. Yes, ma'am.
David, question for you. Being a mom, I can't imagine taking my child to a hospital and going back 2 hours a week to visit. What was it like for you as a 6-year-old in a hospital away from home? I mean, what was the social environment like?
All I wanted to do is go home.
Right.
All I wanted to do is go home. She'd come up on Sunday, and she couldn't say, I'm going home now, because she knew that's what I wanted to do. She said, I'm going to go talk to the doctor. She didn't come back, you know. She went through a terrible time. My sister was ill. She was 4 or 5 months old. She cried all the time. Here I am in a polio hospital and could have died. My granddad was trying to get home from a business trip before I got home at Christmas. He wanted to be there waiting for me. Well, he was in a car wreck, serious car wreck, and he was in the hospital for over 3 weeks. My dad was scared about how am I going to pay for this hospital. I mean, he's a low-ranked engineer at Wicks Corporation. He didn't have any money. My granddad and one of my uncles came to him, and I know this later. They gave him a blank check and said, you take care of it. But he didn't have to pay anything. March of Dimes came in, they paid all the expenses at the hospital, they paid all the expenses at the orthopedic hospital. It's a fabulous thing. Like I said, I've been very fortunate. The March of Dimes paid everything. Now, March of Dimes has a different focus, but another organization, the Rotary Club, has taken up the issue of polio, and I'm very glad for that. I was a Rotarian. Jenny's been a Rotarian for 25 years. We both are Paul Harris Fellows. Our daughter's Paul Harris Fellow, and we have it in our will to give money to Rotary International for the polio project. Hopefully it will not be going on then, but we've left it in our wills that money goes to Rotary, and our daughter understands that. Any other question? I'm going to quit. I know you have a very important funeral. Any other question, I'll be glad to answer. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I apologize for the sound quality on the film. The conference center had some work done, and as always, they fixed some things and messed up something else. We will make copies of this available either on YouTube or through our website. Somehow we will get a copy of that to you. It takes 60 cents, US cents, to vaccinate a child against polio. So for every $100 contribution you have saved, over 166 children from ever contracting this crippling disease. Our children at Early Act had never heard of it. I would like to see a world where nobody will have heard of it. So make your contributions on your way out. We appreciate it. Thank you, David, so much for putting a personal face on this. I want to say one more time about the Shepherd's Men. This is a group that helps returning veterans of war with post-traumatic stress disorder and brain injuries. It is a wonderful cause. If you are interested in helping facilitate the arrangements as they come through Gastonia on their run, please email me. I've got to go to this service. If you'll stand, we will be adjourned with the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Okay, I'll see you Sunday. You look good. That looks very nice.